The blood staining Katherine Cooper's dress had turned from crimson to rusty brown by the time she collapsed beside the well-worn trail of the New Mexico Territory in 1873, her body finally giving out after 3 days of desperate walking. The twin infants in her arms, a boy and a girl only 4 months old, had ceased crying hours ago, their little faces flushed with fever and lips parched from dehydration. Katherine closed her eyes against the merciless August sun, her cracked lips forming silent prayers as dust swirled around them. She had fled with nothing but her children and the clothes on her back, and now, in the vast emptiness stretching toward the distant mountains, she had finally run out of strength. Quinn Barstow saw the heap of faded blue fabric on the trail from a quarter-mile away. At first, he thought someone had discarded a bundle of clothes, until his stallion Midnight snorted nervously and slowed his pace. Quinn had spent enough years on these trails to know trouble when he saw it. Standing in his stirrups, he squinted against the harsh sunlight, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. The bundle moved slightly, and Quinn pressed his heels into Midnight's sides, urging him forward at a gallop. As he approached, the sight before him made his heart drop. A woman lay crumpled in the dirt, her arms wrapped protectively around 2 tiny bundles. Her face was streaked with dust and tears, her lips cracked from dehydration, and her dress torn and stained. But it was the 2 infants nestled against her that truly shocked him, their tiny faces red and listless. Quinn dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the ground. He knelt beside the woman, gently touching her shoulder. "Madam, can you hear me?" His voice was low and gentle, the same tone he used to calm spooked horses. Katherine's eyelids fluttered open, revealing striking green eyes clouded with exhaustion and fear. "My babies," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please help my babies." Without hesitation, Quinn uncorked his canteen and tilted it to her lips. She sipped weakly, then turned her face away. "Them first," she insisted. Quinn's weathered hands, more accustomed to breaking horses than handling infants, carefully tipped tiny amounts of water into each baby's mouth. The little girl stirred and made a soft mewling sound, while the boy remained frighteningly still. "We need to get you all to shelter," Quinn said, looking up at the sky where dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. "My ranch is about 5 miles from here. Can you stand?" Katherine tried to push herself up but collapsed back into the dust, her strength completely spent. Quinn made a quick decision. He helped her take another sip of water, then secured his canteen and stood. "I'm going to put you all on my horse," he said, his voice firm but kind. "I'll walk alongside and lead him, Midnight steady as they come." With gentle hands that belied his rugged appearance, Quinn lifted the 2 infants first, cradling them awkwardly against his chest. They were so light, so fragile, he'd never held children so small. The enormity of their vulnerability struck him hard as he carefully placed them in the crook of his left arm. "I've got them," he assured Katherine as he bent down again. With his right arm, he scooped her up as if she weighed nothing. Years of ranch work had made him strong, and she was painfully thin. She let out a small gasp as he lifted her, her eyes wide with surprise and lingering fear. "I won't hurt you, madam. You have my word," Quinn said as he approached Midnight, who stood patiently waiting. With careful movements, he managed to lift all 3 onto his saddle, arranging Katherine so she could hold her babies securely. Quinn removed his worn leather vest and draped it over the infants to shield them from the sun. "Hold tight to the horn," he instructed, placing her hand on the saddle. "I've got the reins, and I'll be right beside you the whole time." As Quinn began leading Midnight toward his ranch, Katherine's eyes fluttered closed again, her body swaying slightly in the saddle. The twins remained unnervingly quiet, and Quinn quickened his pace, one hand on the reins and the other reaching up to steady Katherine. "Stay with me now," he murmured, as much to himself as to her. "Just a few more miles." The journey to Quinn's ranch seemed endless. The sun beat down relentlessly, and Quinn could feel sweat trickling down his back. He kept up a steady stream of talk, partly to keep Katherine conscious and partly to calm his own nerves. "Ranch isn't much to look at," he said, "but it's solid, got a good well with sweet water. Few cattle, some horses I'm breaking, it's quiet, safe." He glanced up at her pale face. "What's your name, madam?" "Katherine," she whispered after a moment. "Katherine Cooper. My babies are Sarah and Samuel." "Quinn Barstow," he replied. "Pleased to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Katherine managed a weak nod before her head drooped again. Quinn's ranch appeared on the horizon, a modest cabin with a barn and corral, nestled against a backdrop of cottonwoods that marked a small creek. It wasn't grand, but it was the first place that had ever truly felt like home to him. As they approached the cabin, Quinn whistled sharply, and an older man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. His weathered face registered shock as he took in the scene. "Frank," Quinn called. "Get the door and fetch some clean water. We've got folks in need." Frank, Quinn's ranch hand and the closest thing he had to family, rushed to comply. By the time they reached the cabin, the door was open and Frank had pulled back the quilt on Quinn's bed. "What in tarnation?" Frank muttered as Quinn carefully lifted Katherine and the babies from the saddle. "Found them on the trail to Pinewater," Quinn explained tersely as he carried all three into the cabin. "She's exhausted, and the little ones are in a bad way." Quinn laid Katherine gently on his bed, and she immediately tried to sit up, reaching for her children with panic in her eyes. "Easy now," Quinn soothed, carefully placing the infants beside her. "You're safe here. No one's separating you from your little ones." Katherine's eyes filled with tears as she gathered the twins close. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Frank appeared at Quinn's side with a basin of water and clean cloths. "I'll ride for the doctor," he said, his voice gruff with concern. Quinn nodded. "Tell him to hurry." "And Frank," he added in a lower voice, "bring back some of that goat's milk from the Wilsons. These babies need something soon." As Frank departed, Quinn turned his attention back to his unexpected guests. With awkward gentleness, he dipped a cloth in the cool water and offered it to Katherine. "For the little ones first," he suggested. "Then yourself." Katherine's hands trembled as she took the cloth and began to dab at her daughter's feverish face. The baby stirred, making small sounds of discomfort. "How long have you been on the road?" Quinn asked, pouring a cup of water from the pitcher Frank had left. Katherine's eyes darkened with remembered fear. 3 days, she admitted. "Maybe 4, I lost track, on foot, all that way with 2 babies." Quinn couldn't keep the astonishment from his voice. Katherine merely nodded, turning her attention to her son, whose stillness worried Quinn deeply. "Here," Quinn said, offering the cup. "Small sips. When was the last time you ate?" Katherine accepted the water gratefully. "Yesterday, some berries I found." She looked down at her children, her face crumpling. "I had no milk left for them. I tried everything." Quinn felt a wave of helplessness. He knew cattle and horses, not women and babies. But something about Katherine's quiet dignity and fierce protectiveness of her children stirred something deep within him. "Frank's gone for the doctor and some milk," he assured her. "Just rest now, you're safe here." Katherine's eyes searched his face as if trying to determine whether she could truly believe him. Whatever she saw there must have reassured her because she nodded slowly. "Why?" she asked simply, Quinn's brow furrowed. "Why what? Why help us? Most men would have ridden past." Quinn considered the question, his calloused hand absently rubbing at the stubble on his jaw. "Couldn't rightly call myself a man if I did that," he finally said. "Besides, out here we help each other. It's the only way to survive." Katherine nodded again, her eyelids growing heavy. "I don't know how I'll repay you." "Don't you worry about that now," Quinn said firmly. "Just focus on getting you and these little ones well again." As Katherine drifted into an exhausted sleep, Quinn sat in a chair near the bed, keeping watch. The cabin was silent except for the soft sounds of breathing and the occasional creak of the wooden walls as they settled. Outside, a storm was brewing, but inside, for the moment at least, there was peace. Quinn studied the woman sleeping in his bed, wondering what circumstances had driven her to such desperate measures. Her clothes, though dirty and torn, were of good quality. The gold band on her finger indicated she was or had been married, so where was her husband? And why was she fleeing across the territory with 2 tiny infants? These questions would have to wait. For now, Quinn was simply glad he'd found them in time. As he watched over the small family, something shifted inside him, a door opening to possibilities he'd never considered before. The doctor arrived just as the first raindrops began to fall, accompanied by Frank, who carried a small container of goat's milk. Dr. Emmett Wells was a gruff, practical man who had served as a surgeon during the war. He examined the twins first, his expression grave but not hopeless. "Dehydration, mostly," he pronounced, "and some exposure. The boy's weaker than his sister, but they're fighters, both of them." He turned his attention to Katherine, who had awakened at their entrance. "You, young lady, are in slightly worse shape. Exhaustion, dehydration, and unless I miss my guess, you haven't fully recovered from childbirth." Katherine flushed slightly but didn't deny it. Dr. Wells prepared a tonic for her and showed Quinn how to dilute the goat's milk for the babies. "Small amounts frequently," he instructed. "Their little stomachs won't handle much at first, and this one," he nodded towards Samuel, "needs extra attention. If his fever doesn't break by morning, send for me again." Quinn nodded, absorbing every word. After the doctor left, with a promise to return the next day, Quinn set about following his instructions. Frank heated the milk while Quinn helped Katherine sit up, propping pillows behind her. "I can feed them," she insisted, though her hands still trembled. "Let me help," Quinn said. "You need to save your strength." Together, they managed to get small amounts of the diluted milk into both babies. Sarah took to it eagerly, but Samuel barely swallowed, his little face pinched with discomfort. "He's always been the more delicate one," Katherine said, her voice tight with worry. Even before. She trailed off, and Quinn didn't press. Instead, he continued to help with the feeding until both babies had taken what they could. As the rain intensified outside, beating a steady rhythm on the cabin roof, Frank excused himself to the barn where he had a small room of his own. "I'll be close if you need anything," he assured Quinn. "Just holler." Alone with Katherine and the twins, Quinn felt suddenly awkward. "I'll make up a bed for myself by the fire," he said, moving toward the trunk where he kept extra blankets. "Mr. Barstow," Katherine's voice stopped him. "I don't know how to thank you." Quinn turned to face her, struck by how different she looked now that some color had returned to her cheeks. Despite the circumstances, she was beautiful not in a showy way, but with a quiet strength that he found himself drawn to. "Quinn," he corrected gently. "And you don't need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same." Katherine shook her head. "No, not anyone." Her green eyes held his, sincere and direct. "You saved our lives today." Quinn felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. "You're safe now," he promised. "Get some rest, Katherine. Tomorrow will be better." As he made his simple bed on the floor near the fireplace, Quinn listened to the gentle breathing of the woman and her children. For the first time in years, his cabin didn't feel empty. It felt like it was waiting to see what tomorrow would bring. The storm raged throughout the night, wind howling around the cabin and rain lashing at the windows. Quinn slept lightly, waking at every small sound from the bed. Twice he rose to check on Samuel, whose breathing seemed labored. The second time, he found Katherine already awake, cradling her son against her chest, tears streaming silently down her face. "His fever's worse," she whispered, looking up at Quinn with desperation. "He's burning up." Quinn felt the baby's forehead and nodded grimly. He fetched fresh water and cloths, and together they bathed the tiny body, trying to bring the fever down. Little Sarah slept peacefully nearby, unaware of her brother's distress. As they worked side by side in the lamplight, Quinn found himself studying Katherine's face. Worry had etched lines around her eyes, but there was a determination in her jaw that spoke of inner strength. Her hands, though gentle, moved with purpose. "You're good at this," Katherine commented softly, noticing his careful attention to Samuel. "Do you have children of your own?" Quinn shook his head. "Never married," he admitted. "Ranch keeps me busy enough." He dipped another cloth in the cool water and handed it to her. "What about the twins' father? Is he—" Katherine's expression hardened. "Dead," she said flatly. 2 months ago, or so I thought." Quinn raised an eyebrow but didn't push for more. Instead, he asked, "How old are they?" 4 months, Katherine replied, her expression softening as she gazed at her son. "Born in early April, just as the wildflowers were blooming." They continued their vigil through the night, taking turns applying cool cloths to Samuel's feverish body. By dawn, his temperature had finally begun to drop, and Katherine had told Quinn bits and pieces of her story. Her husband, Thomas Cooper, had been a banker in St. Louis. Their marriage had been arranged by her father, a wealthy merchant who saw the union as advantageous. Thomas had seemed respectable enough, but after the wedding, his true nature emerged controlling, jealous, and prone to violent rages when he drank. When Katherine discovered she was expecting, she'd hoped motherhood might soften his heart, but the pregnancy only seemed to fuel his resentment. Then, 2 months after the twins' birth, Thomas had disappeared during a business trip to Kansas City. Word came back that he'd been killed in a hotel fire, his body presumably among those too badly burned to identify. I mourned him, Katherine admitted, her voice hollow. Not because I loved him by then, but because I thought my children would never know their father. She paused, adjusting the cloth on Samuel's forehead. Then last week I saw him in town, very much alive. Quinn's hand stilled. He faked his death, Katherine nodded, her expression grim. It seems he'd embezzled money from the bank, a considerable sum. The fire provided the perfect cover to disappear with it. Her voice trembled slightly. When I confronted him, he threatened to take the twins. Said no one would believe me if I told the truth, that he'd claim I was unstable. He was going to have me committed and take my children. Quinn felt a surge of anger on her behalf. So you ran. That very night, Katherine confirmed. I took what little money I had hidden away in the twins. I thought I could make it to my cousin's home in Santa Fe, but I misjudged the distance, and then the wagon broke down. She trailed off, looking at her sleeping babies. I walked as far as I could. I just couldn't let him take them. Quinn's respect for her grew immensely in that moment. The courage it must have taken to flee with 2 infants, to walk for days through dangerous territory with little food or water, it was remarkable. You did right, he assured her, and you made it. That's what matters now. As the first light of dawn filtered through the windows, Samuel's fever broke completely. The baby opened his eyes the same striking green as his mother's and made a small, hungry sound. Katherine's face lit up with joy and relief. He's hungry, she said, her voice breaking. Quinn, he's hungry. Quinn felt his own eyes grow unexpectedly moist. That's a good sign, he said gruffly, turning away to give her privacy as she prepared to feed the twins. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed, clean world. Quinn stepped onto the porch, breathing in the scent of wet earth and pine. Something had shifted during the night, not just for Samuel, but for Quinn as well. The quiet life he'd built, the solitude he'd thought he preferred, suddenly seemed lacking in a way he couldn't quite articulate. Over the next week, Katherine and the twins gained strength daily. Dr. Wells visited twice more, declaring himself satisfied with their progress. Samuel, though still smaller than his sister, grew more alert and active each day. Katherine began to help around the cabin, insisting she couldn't remain idle while Quinn and Frank provided for them. I'm not an invalid, she declared on the 5th morning when Quinn tried to discourage her from helping with breakfast. And I won't be a burden. Quinn watched as she confidently moved about his kitchen, her dark hair pulled back in a simple braid, her movements graceful despite her still thin frame. The cabin had transformed and her presence. Curtains appeared at the windows, made from an old sheet she'd found. The floors were swept clean, and wildflowers now brightened the rough-hewn table. The twins, too, had become fixtures in the daily rhythm of ranch life. Quinn found himself looking forward to their awakening each morning, to Sarah's delighted giggles when he made faces at her, and to Samuel's solemn gaze that seemed to take in everything. Frank, initially awkward around the babies, had become particularly attached to Samuel. The boy needs extra attention, he declared gruffly, being smaller and all. Quinn often found his ranch hand sitting in the rocking chair, telling outlandish stories to the wide-eyed infant. On the 10th day, as they sat on the porch after supper, Katherine broached the subject Quinn had been dreading. I've imposed on your hospitality long enough, she said, her eyes fixed on the distant mountains. The twins are stronger now. I should continue to my cousin's home in Santa Fe. Quinn felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. The thought of the cabin without Katherine and the twins was suddenly unbearable. There's no hurry, he said, trying to keep his voice casual. Winter will be here before long. Mountain passes get treacherous early. Katherine turned to look at him, her expression unreadable in the fading light. I can't stay indefinitely, Quinn. You have your life, your work. the work gets done, he replied. Frank and I manage just fine. And he hesitated, then plunged ahead. The place feels more like a home with you all here. A soft smile curved Catherine's lips. You've been very kind. It's not kindness, Quinn said, the words coming out more forcefully than he'd intended. He took a breath, gentling his tone. What I mean is, I like having you here, all of you. Catherine's eyes searched his face. Quinn, she began, but was interrupted by the sound of an approaching rider. Quinn stood, his hand automatically moving toward the rifle leaning against the wall. Visitors were rare, especially at this hour. As the rider came into view, Quinn relaxed slightly. It was just Josiah Miller, who ran the general store in Pinewater. Evening, Quinn, Josiah called, dismounting and tying his horse to the hitching post. Hope I'm not interrupting supper. Just finished, Quinn replied, stepping off the porch to greet him. What brings you out this way? Josiah glanced at Katherine, who had risen to stand in the doorway and removed his hat. Madam, he acknowledged with a nod before turning back to Quinn. Got something that might interest you, or rather, the lady. He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a folded paper. This came in with the mail coach yesterday, been posted all over town. He handed it to Quinn, who unfolded it and felt his blood run cold. It was a reward notice with a crude but recognizable sketch of Katherine. The text described her as Katherine Cooper, wanted for questioning in the theft of bank funds and the disappearance of her children, presumed kidnapped. The reward was substantial $500. Quinn's jaw tightened as he read. This was Thomas Cooper's work, no doubt. The man was using his position and connections to hunt down his wife, twisting the truth to make her the criminal. Katherine had moved to Quinn's side and gone very still as she read the notice. He's looking for me, she whispered, her face pale, and he's turned everything around. Quinn nodded grimly. Josiah, you haven't mentioned seeing Mrs. Cooper to anyone, have you? The storekeeper shook his head. Figured something wasn't right about that notice. The lady in your doorway doesn't look like a thief or a kidnapper to me. He replaced his hat. Just thought you should know what's being circulated. Sheriff's got a copy too, though he seemed skeptical. Thanks, Josiah, Quinn said, clasping the man's shoulder. I appreciate the warning. After Josiah departed, Katherine sank onto the porch steps, the wanted poster clutched in her trembling hands. He won't stop looking, she said, her voice hollow. And now I'm a fugitive. Quinn sat beside her, taking the paper and crumpling it in his fist. We'll figure this out, he promised. I know lawyers in Santa Fe who can help clear your name. Katherine looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Why would you do that? You barely know me, and now I've brought trouble to your doorstep. Quinn hesitated, searching for the right words. How could he explain that in just 10 days, she and the twins had become more important to him than anything in the last decade of his life? Because you deserve better, he finally said. Those babies deserve better, and because he took a deep breath, I care what happens to you, all of you. Katherine's expression softened and she reached out to touch his hand. The simple contact sent warmth flooding through him. You are a good man, Quinn Barstow, she said quietly. That night after Katherine had retired with the twins, Quinn and Frank discussed their options. Frank, loyal to a fault, never questioned whether they should help Katherine, only how. We could take her to Santa Fe ourselves, Frank suggested. Safer than her traveling alone, Quinn nodded thoughtfully. That might be best. I know a lawyer there, James Hammond. He helped me with the ranch purchase. He's honest and he has connections. They decided Quinn would ride into town the next day to send a telegram to Hammond, while Frank stayed behind to protect Katherine and the twins. Neither man voiced the possibility that Thomas Cooper might already be in the territory, following the trail of his wife and children. Quinn rose before dawn, wanting to reach town and return as quickly as possible. He found Katherine already awake, feeding Sarah while Samuel slept peacefully beside her. I'll be back by mid-afternoon, Quinn promised as he pulled on his boots. Frank will keep watch. Don't leave the cabin just to be safe. Katherine nodded, her expression determined rather than fearful. Be careful, Quinn. Something in her voice made him pause. He crossed the room and, acting on impulse, leaned down to touch her cheek gently. I will, he promised. You've got enough worries without adding me to the list. She smiled at that, leaning slightly into his touch. Nevertheless, I'll worry until you return. The ride to Pinewater took just over an hour. Quinn headed straight for the telegraph office, where he sent a detailed message to James Hammond, explaining Catherine's situation and requesting assistance. The operator assured him a reply would likely come by afternoon. While waiting, Quinn visited the sheriff's office. Sheriff Dawson was a fair man who had known Quinn for years. If anyone in town could be trusted with the truth, it was Dawson. "Got a minute, Sheriff?" Quinn asked, closing the door behind him. Dawson looked up from his paperwork. "Quinn, heard you've got company out at your place, a woman and two little ones." News traveled fast in small towns. Quinn nodded, taking the chair opposite Dawson's desk. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about." Over the next half hour, Quinn laid out Catherine's story, including her husband's deception and threats. Dawson listened without interruption, only his deepening frown indicating his thoughts. "That's quite a tale," he said when Quinn finished. "And you believe her?" "I do," Quinn replied without hesitation. "I've spent nearly 2 weeks with her and those babies. She's no thief, and the only thing she's guilty of is protecting her children from a man who abandoned them, then threatened to take them when it suited him." Dawson nodded slowly. "I had my doubts about that reward notice. Seemed too convenient." He leaned back in his chair. "But Quinn, if this Cooper fellow is as connected as you say, he might have law enforcement in multiple territories looking for her. I can keep things quiet here, but I can't speak for others." "I understand," Quinn said. "I'm working on getting her legal help in Santa Fe. In the meantime, I'd appreciate if you could let me know if anyone comes asking about her." "I can do that," Dawson agreed. "And Quinn," he added as Quinn rose to leave, "be careful. Men like Cooper, who think money and position put them above the law, they're dangerous when crossed." Quinn acknowledged the warning with a grim nod. "I'll keep that in mind." By mid-afternoon, a reply had arrived from James Hammond. The lawyer agreed to help and advised bringing Catherine to Santa Fe as soon as possible. He would begin gathering evidence of Thomas Cooper's financial misconduct, which would strengthen Catherine's case. Relieved to have a plan, Quinn purchased supplies for the journey before heading back to the ranch. As he rode, his thoughts turned to what might happen after Catherine's legal troubles were resolved. Would she stay in Santa Fe with her cousin? The idea of never seeing her or the twins again left a hollow feeling in his chest. These thoughts occupied him so completely that he almost missed the signs of trouble ahead. Midnight's ears pricked forward and the horse slowed, snorting nervously. Quinn immediately became alert, scanning the trail ahead. Something had spooked his normally steady mount. Quinn drew his rifle from its scabbard and proceeded cautiously. As he rounded a bend in the trail, he saw the reason for Midnight's unease. A man was slumped against a boulder, his horse grazing nearby. The man's head was bowed, his hat obscuring his face, but there was something deliberate about his posture that made Quinn suspicious. "Hello there," Quinn called, keeping Midnight at a safe distance. "You all right, mister?" The man's head snapped up, and Quinn found himself looking into a pair of cold blue eyes. The stranger smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Just resting," the man replied, standing slowly. He was well-dressed, his clothes expensive though travel-stained. Long ride from Albuquerque. Quinn kept his rifle ready but not aimed. "Heading to Pinewater?" he asked casually. "Eventually," the man said, brushing dust from his coat. "I'm looking for someone, perhaps you've seen her, my wife." Dark hair, green eyes, she'd have 2 small children with her twins. Quinn's blood ran cold, but he kept his expression neutral. This had to be Thomas Cooper. The resemblance to Samuel was subtle but unmistakable around the eyes and mouth. "Can't say that I have," Quinn replied evenly. "Not many women traveling alone with children in these parts. It's too dangerous." Cooper's eyes narrowed slightly. "Yes, that's what concerns me. My poor Catherine isn't well, you see. She's been confused since the babies were born, took off without warning." He sighed dramatically. "I've been frantic with worry." "I'm sure you have," Quinn said, unable to keep a trace of irony from his voice. "If I see anyone matching that description, I'll be sure to let Sheriff Dawson know." Cooper's gaze sharpened. "And you are?" "Quinn Barstow. I ranch about 10 miles east of here." Something calculating passed across Cooper's face. "A pleasure, Mr. Barstow. Thomas Cooper." He extended his hand, which Quinn reluctantly shook. If you do happen to see my wife, I'd appreciate it if you'd let me know directly. I'm staying at the hotel in Pinewater." "There's a reward, as I'm sure you've heard." "So I've heard," Quinn confirmed. "Safe travels, Mr. Cooper." As Quinn rode away, he could feel Cooper's eyes boring into his back. He resisted the urge to look over his shoulder or to spur Midnight into a gallop. Any sign of haste might confirm Cooper's suspicions. Once out of sight, however, Quinn took a different trail back to the ranch, one that wound through the hills and would be difficult to follow. He pushed Midnight harder than he liked, knowing that every minute counted now. Cooper was here in the territory and far too close to Katherine and the twins. When Quinn finally reached the ranch, he found Frank on the porch, rifle in hand. The older man relaxed visibly when he recognized Quinn. "Trouble?" Frank asked, noting Quinn's grim expression. "Thomas Cooper," Quinn confirmed, dismounting quickly. "Met him on the trail. He's looking for Katherine and the children staying in Pinewater." Frank swore softly. "Did he follow you?" "Don't think so, but we can't take chances." "Where's Katherine?" "Inside with the little ones." "She's been packing what few things they have. Said she had a feeling it might be time to move on." Quinn entered the cabin to find Katherine sitting on the edge of the bed, folding a tiny shirt. The twins were awake, lying on a blanket nearby, Sarah batting at a wooden spoon while Samuel watched with solemn eyes. Katherine looked up as Quinn entered, her face lighting up momentarily before she registered his expression. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting down the shirt. Quinn didn't mince words. "I met your husband on the trail. He's in Pinewater looking for you." Katherine went very still, her face draining of color. Did he suspect anything?" "Hard to say," Quinn admitted. "But we need to move quickly." Hammond responded, "He'll help us in Santa Fe." He knelt beside her, taking her cold hands in his. "Katherine, we need to leave tonight, under cover of darkness." She nodded, her fear giving way to resolve. "I'll be ready." She squeezed his hands. "Thank you, Quinn, for everything." As Quinn rose to help Frank prepare for their departure, he was struck by the fierce protectiveness he felt for Katherine and her children. It wasn't just sympathy or a sense of duty driving him now, it was something deeper, something that had taken root in his heart during these past days. He would do whatever it took to keep them safe, to give Katherine the chance to build a new life free from fear. And perhaps, if she wanted it, that new life could include him. The preparations for departure were swift and methodical. Quinn and Frank packed only essentials: food, water, blankets, and ammunition. Katherine wrapped the twins in warm layers, her movements efficient despite the tremor in her hands. They would travel light and fast, taking the mountain trail to Santa Fe rather than the main road. As dusk fell, Quinn harnessed his most reliable team to the wagon. Frank would drive, with Katherine and the twins hidden beneath a false bottom they'd constructed that afternoon. Quinn would follow on Midnight, watching for pursuit. "It's about 80 miles to Santa Fe," Quinn explained as he helped Katherine into the wagon. "We'll travel by night and rest during the day. If all goes well, we should reach Hammond's office in 3 days." Katherine nodded, cradling Sarah against her chest while Quinn carefully handed Samuel to her. The baby boy had grown noticeably stronger during their stay at the ranch, his tiny hands now gripping Quinn's finger with surprising strength. "He's going to be just fine," Quinn said softly, reluctant to release the infant. "Both of them will." Katherine's eyes met his, filled with emotions too complex to name. "Because of you," she whispered. Before Quinn could respond, Frank called from the front of the wagon. "Time to go." Moon's rising. With a final check of their provisions, they set out. The wagon wheels had been wrapped in cloth to muffle the sound, and they traveled without lanterns, guided only by moonlight. Quinn rode ahead, scouting the trail, then circled back regularly to ensure they weren't being followed. The first night passed without incident. As dawn approached, they made camp in a sheltered canyon, concealing the wagon beneath overhanging pines. While Katherine fed and changed the twins, Quinn and Frank took turns standing watch. During his rest period, Quinn found himself unable to sleep. His mind kept returning to the moment on the trail when he'd faced Thomas Cooper. The man's cold eyes and calculated concern had chilled Quinn to the bone. There was cruelty there, carefully masked by genteel manners. The thought of Katherine married to such a man, enduring his control and likely his abuse, made Quinn's jaw clench with anger. The twins, too, what kind of father would fake his death, abandoning his newborn children only to return and threaten to take them from their mother? Quinn was still brooding when Katherine approached, carrying a cup of coffee. She sat beside him on a fallen log, her shoulder just brushing his. "You should be resting," he said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "So should you," she countered. "Yet here we are." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the first light of dawn filtered through the trees. In the dim light, Katherine looked both fragile and strong, a contradiction that fascinated Quinn. "Tell me about your ranch," she said suddenly. "How did you come to settle there?" Quinn took a sip of coffee, gathering his thoughts. "Came west after the war," he said. "Needed open spaces after what I'd seen. Worked as a drover, then a ranch hand, saving every penny. 5 years ago, I had enough to buy my own place. It's not much, but it's mine." "It's beautiful," Katherine said sincerely. "Peaceful. I've never felt as safe as I did there." Quinn glanced at her. "You could feel that way again," he said, his voice low. "After this is over, after we've cleared your name." He trailed off, suddenly uncertain, was he overstepping? They'd known each other for such a short time and under extraordinary circumstances. Katherine was watching him, her expression thoughtful. "What are you saying, Quinn?" Quinn took a deep breath. "I'm saying you and the twins could come back if you wanted to." He stared into his coffee cup, finding it easier than meeting her eyes. "The cabin's small, but I could build onto it. There's good grazing land, room for a garden. The creek never runs dry, even in summer." He was rambling now, but couldn't seem to stop. "Frank's fond of the little ones, especially Samuel, and he finally looked up at her. I'd make sure you were never afraid again." Katherine's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Are you offering us a home, Quinn Barstow, or something more?" "Both," Quinn said simply, "if you'll have it." "Have me?" Katherine was silent for so long that Quinn began to regret his forwardness. But then she reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Ask me again when we're safe," she said softly. "When the shadow of Thomas is no longer hanging over us. Ask me then, Quinn." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a rejection either. Quinn squeezed her hand gently. "I will," he promised. The second night of travel brought challenges. A sudden thunderstorm turned the trail to mud, slowing their progress. The twins, disturbed by the thunder and the jolting of the wagon, cried inconsolably for hours. By the time they made camp on the second dawn, everyone was exhausted and on edge. As Quinn helped Katherine from the wagon, he noticed how pale she was, dark circles under her eyes. "You need rest," he said firmly. "Frank and I will watch the twins. You sleep." Katherine started to protest but swayed slightly on her feet, proving his point. Quinn caught her elbow, steadying her. "That wasn't a request," he said, his tone gentle but firm. Too tired to argue, Katherine allowed Quinn to lead her to the small tent they'd erected. The twins were already asleep, worn out from their night of crying. Quinn helped her settle beside them, then turned to leave. "Quinn," Katherine called softly, "stay just until I fall asleep." Quinn hesitated only a moment before sitting beside her on the ground. Katherine reached for his hand, holding it against her cheek. "Tell me about the ranch in spring," she murmured, her eyes already closing. "Tell me what it's like when the wildflowers bloom." So Quinn did, his deep voice painting pictures of meadows carpeted in blue and gold, of newborn foals on spindly legs, of sunlight on the creek and the scent of pine in the warm air. Katherine drifted to sleep with a small smile on her lips, still holding his hand. Quinn watched her sleep, her face peaceful for the first time in days. In that moment, he made a silent vow to himself and to her. Whatever it took, he would make sure she kept that peace. She and the twins would have the life they deserved, free from fear and full of the simple joys of home and family. Eventually, Quinn carefully extricated his hand and left the tent. Frank was tending the small fire they'd risked for coffee, his weathered face thoughtful. "You're sweet on her," Frank observed without preamble. Quinn didn't bother to deny it. "Is it that obvious?" Frank snorted softly, "to anyone with eyes." He poured a cup of coffee and handed it to Quinn. "She's a fine woman. Those babies are lucky to have her for a mother." He paused, giving Quinn a significant look. "They could do worse for a father than you." Quinn stared into the fire, turning Frank's words over in his mind. The idea of being a father to the twins, it should have terrified him. He had no experience with children, had never thought he'd have a family of his own. But when he pictured Sarah's delighted smile or felt Samuel's tiny hand gripping his finger, he couldn't imagine his life without them now. I asked her to come back to the ranch, Quinn admitted. After this is over, Frank nodded approvingly. Good, place needs a woman's touch. He sipped his coffee thoughtfully. And you need someone to soften those rough edges of yours. Quinn smiled despite himself. Frank wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, it was usually worth listening to. The rest of the day passed quietly. Quinn and Frank took turns on watch while Katherine and the twins slept. By late afternoon, they were ready to continue their journey. Santa Fe was still a day's travel away, but their spirits were lighter knowing the end was in sight. As darkness fell and they prepared to set out, Quinn noticed something that made his blood run cold, distant lantern light on the trail behind them. Someone was following. Frank, Quinn said quietly, we've got company. The older man followed Quinn's gaze and cursed under his breath. How many do you think? Can't tell from here, at least 2, maybe more. Quinn turned to Katherine, who was securing the twins in their hiding place. We need to move now. Katherine's face paled, but she nodded resolutely. We're ready. Quinn helped her into the hidden compartment, then covered it with blankets and supplies, making it appear as if the wagon carried only cargo. Stay silent, no matter what happens, he instructed Katherine through the small air hole they'd left. If there's trouble, Frank will get you to Santa Fe. What about you? Katherine's voice was muffled but clearly concerned. I'll be right behind you, Quinn promised, though he wasn't certain he could keep that promise. Trust me. They set out immediately, Frank driving the wagon while Quinn rode ahead, constantly scanning for danger. The lights behind them continued to follow, sometimes drawing closer, sometimes falling back. Quinn estimated there were 3 riders, moving with purpose. By midnight, they had reached a narrow pass between steep cliffs, a natural bottleneck that Quinn had hoped to avoid. With pursuers behind them, they had no choice but to continue through. I don't like this, Frank muttered as they entered the pass. Perfect place for an ambush, Quinn nodded grimly. Keep moving, I'll scout ahead. He spurred Midnight forward, the stallion's hooves echoing off the stone walls. The moon had gone behind clouds, leaving the pass in deep shadow. Quinn strained his eyes, searching for any sign of danger. He was halfway through the pass when he heard the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked. Quinn reacted instantly, flattening himself against Midnight's neck as a shot rang out, the bullet whizzing over his head. Ambush, Quinn shouted, wheeling Midnight around. Frank turned back, but it was too late. More riders appeared at the entrance to the pass, blocking their retreat. They were trapped. Quinn drew his revolver, counting quickly. 5 men total, 3 behind, 2 ahead. The odds weren't good. That's far enough, called a familiar voice from the darkness ahead. Thomas Cooper emerged from the shadows, a rifle in his hands. I'll take my wife and children now, Mr. Barstow. Quinn's mind raced. Cooper must have suspected him from their meeting on the trail and followed him back to the ranch. Or perhaps someone in town had talked, despite Sheriff Dawson's discretion. There's no one here but Frank and me, Quinn replied, keeping his voice steady. We're hauling supplies to Santa Fe. Cooper smiled coldly. Come now, Mr. Barstow, let's not play games. I know Katherine is with you, along with my children. He gestured to the men surrounding them. These gentlemen are being paid very well to help me recover my family. They won't hesitate to use force if necessary. Frank had brought the wagon to a halt, his shotgun ready but held low. Mighty strange way to reunite with your family, he commented, his voice deceptively casual. Most men don't need hired guns to find their wives. Cooper's smile tightened. My wife is unwell, confused. She needs to be protected from her own poor decisions. He stepped closer, his rifle still trained on Quinn. Last chance, Barstow. Hand over my wife and children and you can be on your way. Quinn remained silent, his mind working furiously. They were outnumbered, but Cooper wanted Katherine and the twins alive and unharmed. That gave them some advantage. Mr. Cooper, Quinn finally said, your wife isn't confused. She's terrified of you. He straightened in the saddle, looking Cooper directly in the eye. She told me everything, how you abandoned her and your newborn children, how you threatened to have her committed when she discovered you were alive. Cooper's face darkened with anger. She's lying. Catherine has always been prone to flights of fancy. It's why she needs my guidance." "Is that what you call it? Guidance?" Quinn's voice hardened. "She had bruises, Cooper, fading but still visible when I found her. Did they come from your guidance?" For a moment, Cooper's mask slipped, revealing the cold rage beneath. Then he composed himself, turning to his men. "Search the wagon," he ordered. "Bring me my wife and children." Two men dismounted and approached the wagon. Frank raised his shotgun slightly. "That's far enough," he warned. One of the men laughed. "Old man, you're outnumbered. Put that scattergun down before you get hurt." Frank didn't move. "I may be old, but I only need one shot at this range. Who wants to go first?" The standoff might have turned bloody then if not for a new voice that rang out from behind the wagon. "Thomas." Catherine stood in the moonlight, having emerged from her hiding place. Her face was pale but determined, her chin lifted in defiance. "Catherine," Cooper said, his voice suddenly smooth. "My dear, you've led us on quite a chase. It's time to come home now." Catherine shook her head. "I have no home with you, Thomas, not anymore." Cooper's expression hardened. "Don't be foolish. You're my wife. Those are my children." "The law is on my side." "Is it?" Catherine challenged. "When you've embezzled from the bank, when you faked your own death to escape prosecution, when you abandoned your family, then returned months later to threaten and intimidate me." She took a step forward. "I have proof, Thomas. Documents I took before I left, bank records showing the missing funds, correspondence with your accomplices." Cooper's face went slack with shock, then contorted with fury. "You're bluffing," he snarled, raising his rifle. "You have nothing." "Put the gun down, Cooper," Quinn said, his own weapon now aimed directly at the banker. "It's over." For a tense moment, it seemed Cooper might fire anyway, his face a mask of thwarted rage. Then, slowly, he lowered the rifle. "This isn't over," he said, his voice cold with hate. "Those are my children. No court will give them to a woman who kidnapped them." "Actually," came yet another voice from the pass entrance, "I think they might." Sheriff Dawson emerged from the darkness, accompanied by several armed men. "Thomas Cooper, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and attempted kidnapping." Cooper's hired men, seeing the tables turned, quickly surrendered. As Dawson's deputies disarmed them, the sheriff approached Cooper. "Got a telegram from St. Louis yesterday," Dawson explained, handcuffing Cooper. "Seems the bank there has been investigating missing funds. Your name came up repeatedly." He nodded to Catherine. "This lady's story checked out." As Cooper was led away, protesting his innocence, Catherine sagged with relief. Quinn was at her side instantly, supporting her with a strong arm around her waist. "How did Dawson know to come?" she whispered. Quinn smiled tiredly. "I sent a message from our first camp asking him to follow us at a distance. Thought we might need backup if Cooper was tracking us." Catherine leaned against him, her strength finally giving out now that the danger had passed. "It's over," she murmured. "It's really over." Quinn held her close, feeling her trembling subside. "Yes," he said softly, "now you can start new." Catherine looked up at him, her eyes bright even in the darkness. "Remember what I asked you to do when we were safe?" Quinn nodded, his heart suddenly racing. "I remember. Ask me now, Quinn." In the silver moonlight, with Dawson and his men pointedly looking elsewhere and Frank checking on the twins in the wagon, Quinn took both of Catherine's hands in his. "Katherine Cooper," he said, his deep voice rough with emotion, "will you and your children come home with me? Will you let me build a life with you, care for you, be a father to Sarah and Samuel?" He paused, then added simply, "Will you let me love you for all the days we have?" Catherine's answer was to rise on her tiptoes and press her lips to his in a kiss that held all the promise of tomorrow. The journey back to Quinn's ranch was far easier than their flight to Santa Fe had been. With Thomas Cooper in custody and facing multiple charges, Catherine was free to travel openly. They spent 2 days in Santa Fe, meeting with James Hammond and providing statements for the case against Cooper. The lawyer was confident that Catherine would be granted a divorce and full custody of the twins, especially given the evidence of Cooper's crimes. As they rode home and Quinn realized with quiet joy that Catherine now thought of his ranch as home too, the landscape seemed more beautiful than ever. Spring was giving way to summer, the hills lush with greenery and wildflowers dotting the meadows. Frank rode ahead, whistling tunelessly but happily. In the wagon, Katherine sat beside Quinn, Sarah sleeping in her lap while Samuel gazed solemnly at the passing scenery from the crook of Quinn's arm. The baby boy had grown stronger daily, his resemblance to Quinn rather than Thomas becoming a family joke that contained more truth than any of them acknowledged aloud. "What will you plant in the garden?" Quinn asked, breaking a comfortable silence. Katherine smiled, her face more relaxed than he'd ever seen it. "Vegetables, of course. Tomatoes, beans, carrots, and flowers, hollyhocks by the porch, I think, and sunflowers for the children." Quinn nodded, imagining it. "We'll need to build a proper fence to keep the deer out. And a playpen for the twins when they start crawling. They'll be walking before we know it," Katherine said, a touch of wonder in her voice. "Growing up in open spaces with room to run and explore, it's what I always wanted for them." Quinn shifted the reins to one hand so he could cover hers with the other. "They'll have that and more, I promise." Katherine turned her hand over to grasp his, her green eyes shining with contentment. "I believe you," she said simply. They reached the ranch as the sun was setting, bathing everything in golden light. Quinn helped Katherine down from the wagon, then carefully handed Samuel to her. As Frank began unhitching the horses, Quinn stood for a moment, watching Katherine on the porch, her children in her arms, outlined against the warm glow from the cabin windows. Home, he thought. This is what home truly means. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Quinn stood on that same porch watching a rider approach. It was Dawson, making his monthly visit to bring news and collect any mail for town. "Morning, Sheriff," Quinn called as the lawman dismounted. "Coffee's hot if you're interested." "Wouldn't say no," Dawson replied, tying his horse to the hitching post. He glanced appreciatively at the changes to the ranch, the expanded cabin with its new addition, the fenced garden thriving with late vegetables, the sturdy playpen where the twins now sat, watching curiously. "Place looks good," Dawson commented as Quinn poured coffee into a tin cup. "Katherine's touch, I reckon," Quinn nodded, smiling. "She's got a knack for making things grow, not just plants either." He gestured to the twins, who had noticeably filled out, their cheeks rosy with health. Samuel, once so fragile, now matched his sister in robustness. Katherine emerged from the cabin, wiping her hands on an apron. "Sheriff Dawson," she greeted warmly, "will you stay for lunch? I've just taken bread from the oven." "That's mighty tempting, madam, but I've got rounds to make." "Just stopped to bring your mail and some news." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a thick envelope. "From your lawyer in Santa Fe." Katherine accepted the envelope, her expression sobering. "News of the divorce proceedings," Dawson nodded, "that and Cooper's trial." "Which is what I came to tell you about." He sipped his coffee, then continued. "Cooper was convicted last week, embezzlement, fraud, faking his own death for financial gain. Judge gave him 15 years. Quinn felt Katherine relax beside him. "So it's truly over," she said quietly. "Yes, madam. Cooper's being transported to the territorial prison as we speak. He won't trouble you or those little ones again." Dawson finished his coffee and handed the cup back to Quinn. "Oh, and one more thing. Judge granted your divorce petition. Papers are in that envelope, all signed and sealed." After Dawson departed, Katherine stood on the porch, the envelope clutched in her hands, her expression unreadable. Quinn gave her space, tending to the twins while she processed the news. Finally, she opened the envelope and read the documents inside. When she looked up, tears shimmered in her eyes, but she was smiling. "Free," she whispered. "Legally, officially free." Quinn crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "Does that mean what I hope it means?" Katherine nodded, her smile growing. "Yes, Quinn, yes to everything we've talked about. Yes to becoming a family in every sense." 2 weeks later, in the small church in Pinewater, Quinn Barstow and Katherine Cooper were married in a simple ceremony. Frank stood as Quinn's best man, beaming with pride. The twins, dressed in matching outfits sewn by Katherine, watched the proceedings with wide-eyed fascination from the arms of neighbors who had become friends. As they exchanged vows, Quinn looked into Katherine's eyes and saw not just the woman he loved, but the incredible journey that had brought them together. From that desperate moment on the trail when she collapsed with her babies in her arms, to this day of joy and new beginnings, it seemed both miraculous and somehow inevitable. "I, Quinn, take you, Katherine, to be my wife," he said, his deep voice steady with certainty. To love and to cherish, to protect and to honor for all the days of our lives. Catherine's voice was clear and sure as she repeated her own vows, her hands warm in his. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn kissed her with a tenderness that spoke of all they had overcome and all they had yet to build together. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with neighbors bringing food and music. As dusk fell, lanterns were lit around the yard and someone started playing a fiddle. Quinn found himself being pulled into a dance by his new wife, her green eyes sparkling with happiness. "I don't dance very well," he warned, suddenly self-conscious. Katherine laughed, a sound he never tired of hearing. "Neither do I. We'll learn together." As they moved somewhat awkwardly around the makeshift dance floor, Quinn marveled at how full his life had become in just a few short months. The ranch that had once seemed enough now felt like merely the beginning of something far richer. "What are you thinking?" Katherine asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. Quinn smiled, drawing her closer. "I'm thinking about the day I found you on the trail. How close I came to riding past, thinking you were just an abandoned bundle." Katherine shuddered slightly at the thought. "But you didn't, you stopped." "Best decision I ever made," Quinn said softly, bending to kiss her forehead, "though I never imagined where it would lead." "To this," Katherine said simply, resting her head against his chest as they swayed to the music. "To family, to home." Later that night, after the guests had departed and the twins were asleep in their new room, Quinn and Katherine stood on the porch, looking out at the star-filled sky. Quinn's arm was around his wife's waist, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about that day?" Katherine asked quietly. "When I collapsed beside the road with the twins," Quinn nodded, drawing her closer. "Often. I remember how light you all felt when I lifted you onto Midnight, how still Samuel was, how afraid I was that I might lose you before I even knew you." Katherine turned in his arms to face him. "You saved us that day, not just our lives, but our future." She reached up to touch his face gently. "You gave us a home, Quinn, a place to belong." Quinn caught her hand and kissed her palm. "You gave me the same," he said huskily. "I just didn't know I was missing it until you were here." As they stood together under the vast western sky, Quinn thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. A desperate woman collapsing on a lonely trail. A cowboy lifting 3 precious lives into his saddle. A decision made in an instant that changed everything. Life in the West was harsh and often unforgiving. But sometimes, Quinn reflected as he led his wife inside to the warmth of their home, sometimes it offered second chances, new beginnings, the opportunity to build something lasting from the most unexpected of meetings. And sometimes, when you least expected it, it offered love as vast and enduring as the land itself. 5 years passed, bringing changes to the Barstow Ranch. The small cabin grew into a proper house with a wide porch where the family gathered on summer evenings. The garden expanded, surrounded by a sturdy fence built by Quinn's hands. A small orchard of apple trees took root, their spring blossoms drawing bees that provided honey for Katherine's kitchen. The twins, now 5 years old, were joined by a younger brother, Frank, named for the faithful ranch hand who had become like a grandfather to the children. Old Frank pretended gruffness at the honor but couldn't hide his pride when the youngest Barstow took his first steps, toddling determinedly across the porch toward his namesake. Sarah and Samuel, inseparable as ever, had grown into confident children who knew every inch of the ranch. Sarah had Katherine's quick mind and Quinn's fearlessness, while Samuel, despite his delicate beginnings, had developed into a thoughtful boy with a special way with animals. Neither child remembered Thomas Cooper or the desperate flight that had brought them to the ranch. To them, Quinn was simply Pa, the only father they had ever known. Quinn made it official 2 years after his marriage to Katherine, adopting the twins legally after Cooper, from his prison cell, finally relinquished all parental rights in exchange for a reduction in his sentence. The adoption papers hung framed in the family room, though the twins regarded them with indifference. In their minds and hearts, they had always been Barstows. The ranch prospered under Quinn and Katherine's joint care. Quinn's skill with horses attracted buyers from as far as Denver, while Catherine's garden produced enough to sell surplus vegetables and preserves in Pinewater. They were not wealthy by Eastern standards, but they wanted for nothing that mattered. On this particular evening, as autumn painted the surrounding hills in gold and crimson, the family gathered on the porch after supper. Little Frank now, too, was already asleep in Quinn's arms, his chubby cheek pressed against his father's shoulder. Sarah and Samuel played a quiet game of checkers, their heads bent in concentration over the board that Frank Sr. had carved for them. Katherine sat beside Quinn on the porch swing, her hand resting comfortably in his. Time had added a few strands of silver to her dark hair and fine lines around her eyes, but to Quinn, she grew more beautiful with each passing year. "I received a letter from Clara today," Katherine said, referring to her cousin in Santa Fe who had become a frequent correspondent. "She's coming to visit next month, if that's all right." "Of course," Quinn replied, shifting little Frank to a more comfortable position. "The children will be delighted. Last time they talked of nothing but Cousin Clara's stories for weeks." Katherine smiled, watching their older children. "She's bringing books for them. Says Samuel's reading level is remarkable for his age." Quinn nodded proudly. "Takes after his mother that way." They fell into comfortable silence, the only sounds the soft murmur of the twins' game and the rhythmic creaking of the swing. As dusk deepened into night, Katherine leaned closer to Quinn, her head finding its familiar place on his shoulder beside little Frank's. "Sometimes," she said softly, "I still have to pinch myself to believe this is real." Quinn pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Which part?" "All of it." "The ranch, the children, you." She looked up at him, her green eyes reflecting the first stars of evening. "There was a time when I thought happiness like this was impossible. When I collapsed on that trail, I was ready to die if it meant my babies might be found and saved." Quinn's arm tightened around her, remembering the desperation of that day. "I found all three of you," he said simply, "and lifted us into your saddle," Katherine finished. It had become a touchstone of their shared story, a moment that marked the division between before and after. "I was so afraid of you at first," Quinn chuckled softly, remembering. "I could tell, you looked at me like I might be worse than dying in the dirt. Can you blame me? My experience with men hadn't exactly been positive." Catherine's hand came up to touch his cheek, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with familiar tenderness. "But then you gave water to my babies before yourself, and I thought, maybe this one is different." "I was terrified," Quinn admitted, "had no idea what to do with infants. Just knew I couldn't leave you there." "Thank God for that," Katherine murmured. Their conversation was interrupted by Sarah, who had apparently won the checkers game and now climbed into Catherine's lap, despite being well past the age for such things. "Ma," she said earnestly, "Samuel says Midnight is getting too old to ride, but that's not true, is it? He's still strong." Quinn exchanged an amused glance with Katherine. Midnight, now in his later years, had been retired from ranch work but was still a beloved family pet, especially to Sarah, who had inherited Quinn's love of horses. "Midnight has earned his rest," Quinn explained gently. "But that doesn't mean he can't carry a certain young lady around the paddock now and then if she's gentle with him." Sarah beamed, shooting a triumphant look at her brother, who rolled his eyes good-naturedly. Samuel, for his part, was more interested in the books and maps that Frank brought him from town than in riding. "Time for bed, you two," Katherine said, noting the deepening darkness. "School tomorrow." With minimal grumbling, the twins gathered their checkers set and headed inside after kissing their parents goodnight. Quinn rose, still holding the sleeping toddler. "I'll put this one down," he said, nodding to little Frank. "Be right back." When he returned, Katherine was still on the porch swing, gazing out at the night sky. Quinn resumed his place beside her, and she immediately nestled against him, her hand finding his. "Happy?" he asked, a question he still posed occasionally, needing to hear the answer even after all these years. "Completely," she replied without hesitation. Quinn considered the question, though he already knew the answer. He thought about the quiet joy of watching his children grow, the satisfaction of working his own land, the comfort of falling asleep beside Katherine each night and waking to her smile each morning. He thought about the day that had changed everything, a chance encounter on a dusty trail that had led to this full, rich life. "More than I ever thought possible," he answered honestly. "More than I knew to want before you." Katherine smiled and lifted her face for his kiss, a gesture as natural as breathing after 5 years together. As their lips met, Quinn marveled at how love had transformed his once solitary existence into this tapestry of shared moments, big and small. From desperation on a desert trail to this peaceful evening on their porch, it had been a journey neither of them could have imagined when fate first brought them together. A journey that began when a cowboy lifted a desperate mother and her infants into his saddle, not knowing he was also lifting his own heart toward a future filled with love. Under the vast canopy of stars, Quinn and Katherine Barstow held each other close, grateful for the past that had brought them together and the future that stretched before them, a future they would continue to build one day at a time, side by side.